This past fall, from September to the beginning of November, we spent almost every weekend in Red River Gorge to work on some sport climbing routes. We were very happy to make some good progress on 512D, which we covered in our previous video. These 2 months were performance period for us, and how we trained during the season was substantially different from our intensive off-season training. Specifically, it is very important to maintain your strength and power during your sport climbing season, as you can expect a significant decrease in these aspects. In this video, we're going to show how we trained during the sport climbing season to keep our strength and power while still working on endurance, which we needed for sport climbing. Also, Sahand experienced minor shoulder injury during the season. Minor injuries are common among climbers in shoulder, elbow, and wrist, and he's going to talk about his experience in how to evaluate and address it. Hi everyone, we're Sahand and Akane, climbing together in Indianapolis in the United States. In the past few months until the beginning of November, we spent almost every weekend in Red River Gorge in Kentucky to work on some sport climbing routes. Our objective was to work on some long vertical routes with small edges, one of which was the 5-star 512D. If you haven't watched our previous video, definitely check it out. We were very happy that we got so close on this 12D, even though we both just got our first few outdoor 12A less than a year ago. This is all mainly due to the structured training plan we've had over the last few years, focusing on all energy systems. Overall, we would say our off-season training was successful, and we both got significantly stronger compared to last year. After we finished our off-season training, we gradually tapered our training, and after that, we officially started our sport climbing season for performance. Now it's always fun to go outside and perform, but we did some specific training to some extent to keep up our strength and power between our sport climbing trips. You still need to maintain the good shape and adjust yourself for whatever performance you're doing. In our case, our trip was only weekend, so we still went to the gym once or twice during the week. Since our performance was sport climbing, we wanted to pay particular attention to keep our strength and power. If you're not familiar with the difference between strength and power, we made a video explaining the basic concept, so I recommend you watch that first. We also focused on improving our power endurance that would help us with the route we were working on. But those training sessions were not as intense as off-season training because we were not planning to gain any strength or power, but rather maintaining the same level of strength and power that we had prior to starting our sport climbing season. So a balanced training plan specific to what you're performing is required during the season within limited time you have. In this video, we're going to share our experience of in-season training. Based on our previous experience, we both lose our strength and power after 3 to 4 weeks of only outdoor sport climbing, and we usually won't be able to boulder as hard or have a high quality maximum weighted hangs in the gym. In general, sport climbers usually lose fitness, strength, and power after a few weeks of outdoor sport climbing. So the biggest objective of our in-season training was to not lose our strength and power. I don't know how many of you listened to the Nugget Climbing podcast in September interviewing Cameron Hurst and Drew Rana. But Cameron Hurst mentioned that after a few weeks of sport climbing, you would go back to the gym and work on your strength and power, because you would be surprised how much power and strength you've lost. So in order for us to stay in shape, we included strength and power training at least once a week during our in-season sport climbing. For strength training, we did maximum weighted hangs on the hangboard and lock-off training. For power, we did some campus training and chest bump pull-ups. If you'd like to know specifically how to conduct those exercises, we covered in the previous videos, so go to the description to find the link. In addition to those, we had 1 or 2 hours of bouldering session at high intensity. Bouldering itself is a great training for your strength and power if you pick appropriate routes. We pick routes that require finger strength or power, and usually moonboard benchmark problems are great for these purposes. It is overhang, holes are tiny, and some problems have big explosive moves. I'm sure regular bouldering routes are great as well, but you wouldn't want to pick, for example, slab problems that don't require much strength and power. If you combine bouldering and hangboard training, make sure you conduct your hangboard exercise when you're fresh but warmed up. Another thing we focused on was endurance training. Since we were climbing outside every weekend, which itself was a good overall endurance training, we only added one day for power endurance during the week. For our endurance day, we worked on both strength and power endurance. The strength endurance was on campus world ranks as we covered in the previous endurance video. For power endurance, instead of 4x4, we did circuits on the spray wall. The spray wall in our home gym is steep and almost 40 degrees overhang. The circuit routes we did had approximately 30 to 40 moves, so using these routes resembled sport climbing routes. We would climb these routes 5 to 6 times with 8 to 10 minutes rest. It was a very hard training for me personally, as power endurance is my weakness, but it helped a lot. Our project in red had some powerful moves at the beginning and at the end, and I think this training helped a lot with those moves. So we try to plan our training nicely in accordance with our outdoor performance, but still something unexpected happens. Sahand experienced minor shoulder injury during the season, which took him some time to evaluate and address. Shoulder injury is very common among climbers, and other minor injuries like golfer's elbow or wrist injuries happen, so I hope his experience can be helpful.
So this is what happened. I had a regular climbing session followed by some bouldering and then little training, and then I cooled down, which it felt completely normal. But I woke up the next day and I noticed a little bit of redness around my AC joint, which you can see the bump. This bump's been here for a long time and I'm not sure how I injured it previously. But it never caused any issues for me. However, in general, I just knew that I do have a little bit of bump on my left shoulder compared to the right, which that kind of made me feel a little bit more comfortable because I knew this been here for a while. Anyway, when I touched and pressed around this AC joint here, I was able to move my shoulder without any pain, but when I pressed it, I could sense a little bit of pain around it. Of course, I panicked and I got upset. I started icing this joint for 2-3 times during the day, and then after a few days I just didn't have any pain after that. But after a few days I started to test to see how my shoulder feels, and I started by pulling my hands apart, and I could feel a little bit of pain around this area, which really made me worried. So after this happened, I stopped climbing for a week and just wanted to see how bad the injury is, or if it's really injured or it's just a minor tweak. So I went to see a physical therapist and they checked my rotator cuff and everything was positive, and they told me there is no sign of serious injury at that moment, which it kind of made me feel better. So after a week of resting, I did go back to climbing and I started doing some easier moves to see what triggers the pain or what does not. What I noticed was that I was able to traverse or move around the gym on big holes easily, but as soon as I started doing very hard lock-off moves on my left shoulder, I could see that the pain is coming back in this area. But even though I was able to traverse around the gym or do some exercises, I didn't really want to rush things, and after noticing that the pain is still there after a few days, I really wanted to make sure that everything is okay and I'm not rushing things. So I went to see an orthopedic doctor and they did a CT scan and everything came back normal, that my rotator cuff was in place and there wasn't any injury, and I could go back to climbing. The doctor did prescribe a type of steroid which could technically just take the pain away and I could just go back to my regular activity, which I'm gonna talk about it a little bit later in the video. So during the PT assessment, the doctor did mention that I have some muscle tightness around my shoulders, which it can be due to poor posture, due to my regular full-time job or climbing regularly, and they did teach me some exercises that I could do, and I did a little bit bit more research and I came out with some exercises. So here are some tips from my experience for the last few years that I've dealt with different types of luckily minor injuries. So it might be useful for somebody who's going through the same thing. But number one is that evaluate your pain, whether it's your shoulder, your arm, your fingers, and see how serious it is and what has caused it. Number two is that stop climbing even if you think the injury is not serious. Just take a few days off and evaluate the pain and make sure it's okay for you to go back to climbing, because taking a week or two off, it's really not going to affect your climbing that much. But if you rush things, the injury can get worse and it's just gonna take longer, of course, to recover. And the last thing I really like to share with you guys, that's my personal opinion and that's what I've experienced for the last few years when I've had minor injuries. But I think minor climbing injuries related to your wrist, shoulder, which is not causing like a lot of pain, it can be treated by taking a few days off, evaluating what has caused that problem and avoiding certain moves. Usually when I refer to a doctor when I have a minor injury, as long as the injury is not serious, they usually prescribe a type of steroid so I can go back to my climbing activity. But I personally don't take steroid or painkiller immediately after having a minor climbing injury, which can be treated by resting a little bit longer and avoiding certain moves. So after this happened, it took me 4 to 6 weeks to become completely injury free. I did lose some strength and power during this period, but I was still able to climb, do some easier moves and do more like traverse type of moves. And I also stopped doing the moves that would trigger my shoulder injury.
Injuries are always frustrating, and it is important that climbers practice antagonist exercise on a regular basis. During the off-season and in-season training, we made sure to spend 30 minutes after each training session on some antagonist exercise. If we didn't do any of these antagonists, Sahan's shoulder injury could have been worse, or I could have had injuries as well. In this video, we talked about how we trained during the sport climbing season. We made some training videos in the past, but how we trained was substantially different during the season, and I hope this video was helpful for you. Thank you for watching the video. Our channel explores climbing gyms, cracks, and specific topics including training. Please subscribe and support us if you like this video.